The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the official positions of the sponsors, advertisers, or presenters. Advertising does not imply endorsement by the sponsors and presenters.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Lighting Controls Podcast. We have another fantastic guest for you today, but before we jump into the conversation, let me take a minute to remind everyone, today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Academy.
And it's an official podcast by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. Check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. Got all of our episodes and a whole lot more. But huge shout out to our sponsor for this episode. We cannot do this without your support. The Dolly Alliance and their North American Dolly Summit, which is going to be happening in Dallas this year, September 16 to 17. It is co-locating with ArcLight Summit. So definitely check it out. If you're unfamiliar with the Dolly North American Summit, you should really check it out. It's a really cool way to get some information about Dolly, what's happening in the world regarding Dolly, and to really kind of get a new perspective, because there's a lot going on. We've had a couple of people on talking about the new Dolly 2 protocol, and so really worth your time to check it out. Check it out at dali-alliance.org. But let's get into the conversation. So today we have Jason. Jason, do you mind just giving us a quick breakdown on who you are and what you do?
Sure. I'm Jason Livingston. I wear several hats. I'm the principal of Studio TL, which is a design firm located in Brooklyn. About half of what we do is architectural lighting, and half of what we do is designing performing arts theaters. I'm the co-chair of the IES Color Committee. So as a result of that, I am a huge advocate of TM30 and talk about that quite frequently. And I've been teaching lighting design in and around New York City for longer than I care to admit. And I'm currently on the faculty at New York School of Interior Design and at Fashion Institute of Technology.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. It's great to have people from all different perspectives of lighting controls. And, sometimes people reach out to us and are like, okay, what are we going to talk about? But, there's so much that goes on, especially when it comes to color and lighting control. And so just curious, from your vantage point, especially when it comes to education, where are we when it comes to lighting controls? Are we seeing increased interest? Are we seeing challenges with educating, especially new people to the industry regarding lighting controls? Just curious to hear where you think everything is right now.
Sure. Well, interrupt me when I start talking too long. I think
no worries on that.
Okay, good. I think, first of all, the energy conservation codes are such that you have to know controls as a lighting designer. I mean, I guess there are still people who will say, well, I'll leave all of that to the electrical contractor, or the electrical engineer, or well, I'll call my rep and they'll do my control system for me.
Right.
I have to believe that approach is aging out, right? Because we just have to know how to get a code compliant system.
Right.
And then when you add on top of that the fact that color and color changing is not for Las Vegas anymore. I do it in corporate facilities all the time.
Right.
And so now you have to have an understanding of 0 to 10 volt systems if you're doing tunable white, or DMX or Dolly if you're doing color changing. And so, I mean, it's a part of, I didn't mention that I've written 2 books on lighting design, but there's a chapter in both books on controls, and in the classes that I teach, we cover controls every semester. It's a lot. Certainly some people struggle with it.
Right.
But I don't see how you can, certainly if you're young, I don't see how you can be entering the profession today with the goal of remaining ignorant about controls.
Sure. Well, and so I'm curious from that standpoint, like you said, there's some challenges. What are the common challenges for students trying to learn about lighting controls right now?
I'm teaching right now. I've got a summer session, and it's all about controls. And the question that my students are asking me are simple things in some cases. Can I have a system that is controlling some lights 0 to 10 and some lights DMX.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like sometimes it's very basic questions like that. Other times it's, what can a control system do,
Mm-hmm.
and how much hardware is required to do it. So I have a student
Mm-hmm.
who wants a color changing cove all the way around an open office, but she wants colors to flicker across it, almost like, in some cases, like fire, or in other
Oh,
cases, like
interesting.
light coming through water,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so how do you go about, first of all, do you understand the difference between a preset system and a timeline system?
Right.
So that was a challenge for the whole class. And then what does a timeline system mean, and how do you go about
Mm-hmm.
not even
And
programming it, because you're going to have a technician, but how do you understand it, and how do you put it into a controls narrative?
mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
so just for our audience, I imagine some of them don't understand the distinction between those two. Do you mind just giving us a quick comparative definition?
Yeah, the way I describe it to my students is a preset system is a series of snapshots, right? You push a button, the
Mm-hmm.
lights go to a state, and they stay that way until you push another button.
Mm-hmm.
And sure, there can be changes without a button press. We can have a time clock make a change. But essentially the idea is you push a button, you get a look in the room, and you stay there until you want to change.
Right.
A timeline system is, I think, is best thought of as perhaps as a continuous modification to the lighting from the time you push a button for the length of the timeline that you've written. Right. And so there can be periods of static lighting in there. But the idea would be, if we wanted to do flickering fire in our cove, that you're writing, perhaps it's a 10-minute loop, perhaps it's a 1-minute loop, but there is continuous change to the lighting. There's continuous flickering. And that is not achievable from a system that is based on a snapshot.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, basically, regardless of whether you're looping it, you're creating this segment of sequential events that otherwise wouldn't necessarily be connected to each other. You could just kind of take each one as its own preset, but because you now have a timeline that is stretching out between them, you have additional criteria you need to think about. Okay, what's going to be the fade between one state and another? How bright is one state going to be versus another state? And so it creates an effect like what you're talking about, where you have a flickering fire effect in your cove. You need to think through, like, what is that flickering going to be like in time?
Yeah. And if you're not up to programming that, then I think, the knock-on question is, how much of this is already in the can in the system? How much of this is there at least a starting point?
Right.
But so it's I mean, from my perspective, mandatory that designers understand controls and understand them, depending on how you work. If you're just doing offices, right? Okay, fine. Then you don't need a deep control understanding beyond code compliance.
Right.
But as I said earlier, today, so many clients and so many different applications are asking for more, and are asking, like, what kind of creativity can you bring to this project to make my office or my restaurant or my whatever more engaging and more exciting?
Right. So I'm curious, because it's been so long since I've thought about this. Like, how, when you're talking to the students about these differences between timeline and preset based systems, and then I'm sure at some point you get into the fact that, well, you can have both concurrently because you can have multiple systems that talk to each other. How do they process that? What kind of, how does that go when you're sitting there teaching this? Do you get a bunch of blank stares at first, or do they ask a gazillion follow-up questions because they don't understand? I'm just really curious how they are processing and interpreting this.
It really varies both from student to student, and oddly enough, from year to year. Classes seem to have something of a personality. But what I'm teaching is essentially Controls 101. So we do reach a point at which I say, okay, listen, that's probably too much, right? Let's not dive any deeper. Let's stop here and make sure that we understand where we are. And if this is where your career goes, you'll take other classes, you'll work more closely with the manufacturer, you'll advance your knowledge. But yeah, so not to name drop, but one of my students had called up the local ETC office and was talking about, the person there that they were speaking with, who's also on our faculty. Well, you can have Mosaic and you can have Paradigm, and they can exchange they can exchange commands back and forth. And so you've got a static system and you've got a dynamic system. And I mean, I could just sort of see her eyes.
Right.
It just became, when you're like at your 5th week of controls education.
Right.
That's a lot.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I think, to the point of both sides, I mean, we're trying to find a way to make things more accessible and more, easy to understand, but at the same time, we do have terminology that we need to adhere to. Otherwise, it's continues to get worse and worse, and how we standardize how we're talking to each other. But at the same time, I mean, that is sort of the conversation that happens a lot between sales reps and lighting designers, where it's basically the sales rep knows a whole lot about their system and just starts info dumping, and the lighting designer is just like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Which frankly is a lot of some of what I appreciate about the LCA website. Right. And there's a lot of assistance there for people who need to increase their knowledge base and their understanding.
Yeah, the Lighting Controls Academy does a huge amount of effort just trying to help people understand, and so glad to hear that you find it helpful in that regard.
Yeah, I send my students there quite a bit, and also for the very elaborate application specific control spreadsheets that you've got.
Oh, sure, the Education Express.
Yeah,
or the Design Express. My apologies. Yeah, so you're actually incorporating sequence of operations education into your classes
to a certain extent. I think there are different approaches to how you document what you want the controls to do, or how you want the controls to operate. And they get a little exposure to doing it in a narrative format. They get a little exposure to doing it in a sort of a table format. They get exposure into how to take it even further with, for example, with the spreadsheets that you guys have, because they're so detailed. And maybe this is information that is issued during CA, or maybe this is information that has gone over with the commissioning technician before they go, or when they get to the job site, right? Maybe that's not something that goes into the design documentation.
Sure.
Yeah.
So as you're going through all of this, and like you said, it is kind of, it's 101, right? So how much do you get into different types of systems? Do you try to keep it pretty agnostic and just talk about how different types of systems operate? Or do you actually bring in, reps or manufacturers and bring some systems in and kind of run the students through, how some of these parts and pieces go together?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, I like to start off just talking about the control protocols.
Yep.
Or just talking about, the various types of dimming technology that's out there, independent of manufacturers, right? Like what do you need for a 0 to 10 volt system? Well, you need 4 wires, and what's going over those wires.
Right.
But later on, when we're working on a project and they need to design a control system for that project, then we do need to get manufacturer specific. And my particular approach is to say, okay, I've chosen 3 manufacturers that you're going to work with. Depending on how elaborate your project is, you're either going to be doing an X system, a Y system, or a Z system. And so I get them familiar with 3 of the very large manufacturers, on the assumption that they can then take that information and translate it to other manufacturers later on in life. We'll see if that's accurate.
I mean, I think it makes sense, like,
Yeah.
because we're we need to get from zero to something. It's not about getting them to
Yeah.
expert level. And, I feel like everybody in the industry who hasn't been a controls specialist is trying to gain traction as quickly as possible right now. It seems like there's a huge interest in lighting controls education and knowledge. And so what you're trying to do is help people even before they enter the industry. Like, this is what the baseline you need to understand about lighting controls so that you can really get going. But I would say, it sounds like even lighting professionals who have been in the industry for years now could benefit from taking your 101 class.
I think that I think a lot of us could use refreshers from time to time. I know that I do, and when I go to places like Education or ArcLight Summit, I'm looking forward to some of the continuing education or repeat education or refreshing education to stay on top, and also, frankly, to see what manufacturers might be bringing to the table in the near future. I've recently had a conversation with a colleague about the fact that control systems don't know the wavelength of the RGB LEDs they're controlling. And therefore, it becomes very difficult if you're trying to very precisely match fixtures from two different manufacturers.
Well, no, and that's a really good point. Do you mind just going a little bit deeper into that for people who might not understand what you're talking about?
Sure. There is no industry agreed upon primary red, green, blue, amber, pick your color LED.
Right.
And we've got a bunch of different manufacturers out there using different processes, and in some cases with different goals, so that if you were to look at, what is the peak wavelength in your very narrow distribution from, let's say, a blue LED, it might be, I'm going to make up numbers now because I'm kind of drawing a blank, but it might be 480 nanometers, it might be 490, it might be 500. And if you get a mix, if your coves have a peak at 480, but your downlights have a peak at 500, 20 nanometers doesn't sound like a lot, but we can see that.
Right.
So right off the bat, you have a mismatch.
Yep.
And if you want to then, if you've got the same kind of mismatch with your reds and you want to make a magenta, then you get two different magentas.
Right.
And it would be great if our control systems could be told what the peak wavelength was or some other parameter about the LEDs so that they understood how they could mix, so that when you say, I want magenta, perhaps by touching a color wheel, I want this color, it can figure out what's happening in the cove and what's happening in the downlight and get us to the closest possible match. And that just doesn't exist. I mean, I think it doesn't. It exists theatrically, where some theatrical control manufacturers know what's coming out of some lights, but it doesn't exist architecturally at all.
Right. No, and I think, one of the arguments that I can imagine some of the lighting designers pushing back on that right now would say is, well, also it's the reflectance of the surface that you're lighting. It's not just the actual light coming out of the fixture. But if you're already in a mismatch situation, it's not going to help that you're now working with different surface colors as well. So, but, from the current standpoint, if you're not using a really robust system, it does take a lot of time to line up those colors once you figure out that there's a mismatch between the two.
Yeah, or it certainly can. I mean, I'm not saying that there's a mismatch between every single pair of fixtures, right?
Right.
But it can be an issue, and this was the conversation that came up because of my experience on the color committee. A couple of people were asking me, like, is there a trick to figuring this out in advance and getting somewhere? Like, yeah, get a sample into your office, right, and figure it out yourself. But But no, there's no spreadsheet that I can share that
Right.
does that.
No, and unfortunately, it doesn't. Even putting that in the control system won't fix all the issues, right? Because not all drivers are created equal. So when you get into color changing, if you've got, if you could have the exact same tape light if you're putting it in a cove, right? But if you use 3 different drivers, yes, when you drive them to full, the reds will be the same, the greens will be the same, the blues will be the same. But once you get into dimmed levels and mixed colors, depending on the quality of the driver and the manufacturer, you'll find differences just in the perceived colors. So now you're beyond, okay, I have the exact same color LEDs, but now because I have these different drivers, I'm getting perceived different colors. So even if we put that information into the control system, if you've got something in the middle that's different between them too, you run the risk of having differences in those perceived colors. So it's not so cut and dry as like, oh, if we could just do this, we could fix it.
Right.
It only partially fixes it.
Yeah. Although still, I would love to see some manufacturers take that partial fix step.
Yep.
Totally.
And I think that,
Well,
the first person. Go ahead.
You're running the color committee, and so I'm curious, what is there a way in which the community can kind of push back and say this is something we need and get the attention of the manufacturers?
I mean, I want to say yes and no simultaneously. I mean, the yes part is that we're all told, and we desperately want to believe that the manufacturers listen to specifiers and respond. But I mean, just speaking from my TM30 experience, it is like turning an aircraft carrier, right? It is not
right.
That response is very slow in coming.
No, totally. And I mean, for those who are unfamiliar with TM30, do you mind just giving a quick explanation of that? Because, there are so many people who still stick to CRI.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I was just thinking about this because I'm working on a presentation. And so I think that CRI is kind of a checkbox in a specification, right? Where basically you have some LEDs that fall into a bucket that has the number 80 assigned to it, and some LEDs that fall into a bucket that has the number 90 assigned to it. But I think if you asked, because it's just a specification checkbox, I think if you asked a lot of people, a lot of lighting designers even, like, what does CRI measure? What is color rendering? What is color fidelity? I think you probably won't get great clear answers. But we haven't needed great clear answers because all we've had since 1965 is basically I can specify typical or I can specify better.
Right.
You don't need to know a whole lot to do that. TM30, which is now 10 years old, is a modern advanced system of analyzing the spectrum of a light source and then combining some of the measurements that come out of that to allow designers now to make color rendering a design choice instead of a checkbox. And that choice is currently 3 different options, although in the future there could be more. The first is rendering colors as you might expect them to appear, which is color fidelity. The other one is rendering colors in a way where they are slightly distorted, but in a way that people actually prefer over fidelity, which we call preference. And the third is increasing the saturation of colors, possibly to the point of being cartoonish, which we call vividness. So you have this preference, vividness, fidelity system, or PVF system. Most light sources meet some of the requirements, often of preference and fidelity together. But with this PVF system, we can say to ourselves, okay, what is the application? What are people expecting in this room? Should colors really appear as expected? Can colors be distorted for the purpose of increasing the aesthetic appeal of the room? Right. And so now we're able to look at a light source or several light sources and make some genuine design decisions
Mhm.
as opposed to just, yeah, I'll take the cheap one or the expensive one.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. But obviously, there's a whole lot more to be said about TM30 and color rendering.
Sure.
But in a nutshell, I think that's the distinction between what CRI has been giving us for the past 60 years
Yep.
and what TM30 gives us if the manufacturers will give us the information.
Yes. So
Yeah.
why do you think there's been so much pushback on this one? Kills me. Like, why is there so much pushback on TM30? Because my personal opinion, CRI is crap, right? You can just boost the red and say I've got a high CRI, but it doesn't necessarily tell you anything about the fixture or how it's actually going to look in the real world. Like you said, it's a checkbox.
Yeah.
So why is there so much pushback?
On the design side, I've heard a number of people who've been in the business for a while say that it's hard, right? I mean, TM30 spits out 149 measures. You don't need to pay attention to those. You only need to know about 4. You could ignore those 4 because those 4 are used in combination to assess preference and vividness and fidelity. And so you could just think about 3 things, but 3 things is 2 more than 1. And with CRI, you only have to know 1 thing, right? 80s or 90s. Right. And I think a lot of people who've been doing this for a while have just become very comfortable with the idea that color rendering is not something I need to think about. I just need to pick 80 or 90. And so now we're adding a layer of complication to the design process by suggesting that people think hard about color rendering. From my students, on the other hand, it's a no-brainer to them. Like if they're introduced to the system while they're learning about lighting, then the answer is like, well, of course, this makes all kinds of sense. How exciting that I have design choices to make in color rendering and in CCT and in direction and distribution and all of those other things. On the manufacturer side, I get it. It's a lot of data, and potentially it means revising every single one of your cut sheets.
Right.
And do you really go to all of that effort if you're not getting a lot of people asking for it?
Right.
And so I understand why it's taking them a while. I'm seeing more and more manufacturers providing the information either separate from their cut sheets, which is fine, right? A separate download, right? And a lot of them are like, we have the data, we just don't know how to get it to people. And so we'll give you a TM30 report when you ask for it. We have them, we'll email it to you right away, but we're not going to put them on our website because we don't know what to do with all of that information.
Right.
But now that the CIE, which is the organization that wrote and manages CRI, now that in January of last year, January of 25, even they said the industry should move away from CRI and towards the fidelity metric within TM30. I mean, and the color committee, we had a party over that. I'm hopeful that as more designers and manufacturers learn of this announcement, that they will say, all right, I mean, I've been hearing about TM30 for a long time. Maybe I need to educate myself on this.
Well, and when the authority in charge of CRI comes out and says it, I mean, that's that's like, IEEE coming out and saying, stop using hardline connection for your internet. Like suddenly everybody's paying attention.
Right.
So, I think ultimately, but your point is valid with the manufacturers. I mean, I remember a few years ago, we had 0 to 10 volt wires change from gray and purple to pink and purple. And that was a huge ordeal in its own way, because all the cut sheets, all the installation instructions, all the devices had to be updated to align with that. Granted, it was just a simple color change, but it overhauled a huge amount of stuff. And so this is not just a simple color change on a wire. This is metrics that need to be measured and displayed in data. But, going to that presentation that you're putting together, I'm guessing for ArcLight Summit, which, we did a teaser for this June, which I think, really kind of got a lot of interesting points across to the audience who attended it. You have some really interesting ways of just kind of quickly evaluating TM30 and what LP30, which is the new guidance for TM30, just sort of having some rule of thumb approaches. And I'm curious if you don't mind sharing some of those ways of evaluating on this show.
Well, I mean, we could talk about LP30, right? LP30 takes TM30 and particularly the PVF system,
Mhm.
the PVF buckets, if you will, and explains to specifiers how you can integrate that information into your workflow, starting in schematic design and carrying through a whole project. The short answer is that in schematic design, all we would expect from somebody who's thinking more carefully about color rendering is to select the color rendering goal or goals, right? So are you working on a project where preference and or vividness and or fidelity are important? And just be able to state that. I think it's particularly important when you want to do something that is not fidelity, right? But in a SD narrative, to just be able to say that. When you get into design development, the PVF system is tiered. So for each of those three, in a horizontal row, there are 3 vertical rows or columns. And we call those our priority levels. And so priority level 1, the numbers are such that you have the highest likelihood that a group of people who understand what you're trying to do would look at your work and agree. So, okay, I want to light this restaurant in a way that people prefer the appearance of the colors versus under a high fidelity light source.
Yep.
If people understood what preference was and they were able to look thoughtfully, better than 90% of them would say, yes, we agree, you've met your color rendering goals at a priority level 1. Priority level 2, the numbers open up a little bit, probably includes more products, less certainty that you're going to achieve that. Priority level 3, the numbers open up even more, a little bit less certainty, but still something like 65% or more of people would agree that you've achieved this. So when you get into design development, we say, okay, it's not just I'm looking for a light source that is preferred, but to be able to state what priority level, and to be able to state perhaps priority level for 2 different design goals if you have them. Maybe it's a combo of fidelity and preference. And once you understand that I'm looking for a light that falls into this box and that box, then you can begin to solicit TM30 information or download TM30 information or explain to a manufacturer, here's what I'm looking for and why. And in an ideal world, they're like, I've got an LED that does that. I should say now as an aside, like now I kind of want to go in a different direction because unfortunately today we're still in that's either an 80 or a 90. Right? CR80 or CR80, CRI90. And what I want to see on a cut sheet is like, you can have this high fidelity LED or you can have this high preference LED. Like, give me a genuine choice. Right. But back to LP30, then when we get into the chapter on construction documentation, there are text examples of how this information might fit into a narrative. Tabular examples of how some of this information might be conveyed in a fixture schedule. Other text information about how this information might be conveyed within a specification. So, right, designer's choice. How do you want to communicate this information? Here's examples of how you can do it in all ways. Take this information and go forth in TM30. Right. And it's a really, I mean, we worked on it I think we were working on it for 3 years, committee of like 6 or 7 of us. But at the end of the day, it took a long time, but at the end of the day, I think it's a really clear document that I think, and I hope, helps a lot of specifiers ditch CRI and really integrate TM30 into the process.
Yeah. And I think, it really does target specifiers, right? And this is where I think more people will hopefully start to pick it up, and maybe if they understood it a little better, because if they put together their fixture schedule and all they have listed is the CRI of the fixture types, and someone tries to, swap it for an alternate fixture, there's no guarantee the designer is now getting what they truly wanted or in the intent that they wanted, but they're getting a fixture that matches the same box, but it's not the same fixture. Whereas if you have that TM30 data in there and you say, these are the types of things I'm looking for, it makes it a lot harder to just sub that fixture. Not that it's impossible to sub fixtures, but you now have someone who's the electrician can't just go and swap a fixture for the cheaper thing because it matches that CRI 80 box.
Yeah.
Now there's some actual homework that has to go into this.
Yeah, and I think that's where CRI really falls down, right? Is that it's a measure of how closely the light source you're looking at matches its reference light source.
Yep.
But there's no information presented at all. You can't get the information about what that mismatch is if you have a CRI of 80, right? Are reds not rendered well? Are greens not rendered well? Are blues not rendered well? I don't know. It's a number. It's 80. But with TM30 and the graphics that TM30 produces, you can see it. You can see where colors are being increased in saturation, no change, and decreased in saturation, right? And so that's very useful. The example I like to give to my students is, if I'm lighting a John Deere tractor showroom, I'm interested in greens, right? But if I'm lighting a Levi's store, I'm interested in blues. Some CRI 80 fixtures will be great for the blues. Some will be great for the greens. How can I tell? Right? And you can't, but with TM30 you can.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. Well, we're almost out of time here, so I just kind of want to recap and package what we talked about here, because I mean, this is really interesting stuff to keep aware of and keep updating your mind on things such as TM30, because we do kind of get into this minutia of just the same routine again and again, and where's my checkbox and how can I get this project done as quickly as possible. And there's a lot of arguments for why that is the case, but we really do, if we want to provide high quality lighting, we need both the mindset of how do we control the light fixtures from a digital perspective, but also how do we make sure that what we're going to be delivering on site is going to align with what we need it to align with, because otherwise we are going to have a heck of a time trying to get colors to match to each other, especially if we're doing really extravagant color setups. I remember a couple of colleagues I had in the past needed very precise colors because they were the color of the company. And, it's like, yeah, I can kind of put those numbers into the machine, but what you get out of the fixture is probably not going to align with that. And so, getting a better understanding of how we have these metrics in place, getting a better understanding of, what the manufacturer can provide us for information is really critical to our success. And so it's sort of a two-way combination effort. One is making sure the fixture can actually produce what you need it to produce. The other is making sure that the controls platform can actually help you achieve that result and align everything at the same time. So it's a huge effort and burden in some cases. And so to your point, Jason, it'd be great if we had standards that helped people a little bit further along the way. And we do, at least when it comes to TM30. That's a great resource. But on the other side of the equation, we don't really have that in the controls side, and we don't have a way of conveying to people, this is the peak value for red in this fixture. And that would be a really critical and helpful resource to have on the controls side, because then we don't have to, guess are these fixtures going to align, or do I have to fuss with them?
Yeah. Unless you're in a closed system where the fixtures and controls are made by the same manufacturer,
Right.
We do need that. We do need that.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Jason, thank you so much. Absolutely fantastic conversation. Your students are lucky to have you. Like,
Oh, thank you.
you
Thank
are absolutely full of amazing information. You're doing amazing things for the industry. And taking your class must be a lot of fun. I would love to, if I lived in the city, I would love to sit through. That must be a ton of fun. I'd be a fly on the wall and listen to these kids, like, start from nothing and learn about lighting controls and go through all this. And then you teaching them about, TM30 and all these other things that they wouldn't necessarily see if they're looking at certain spec sheets and, information that's out there. So it's fantastic. And, you're really helping sort of the next generation and really fostering that. And that's really what the industry needs, right? Education. We talk about it all the time on this show, education, education, education. And you are truly doing more of it than we are by any metric out there. So thank you for everything you're doing. It's absolutely amazing. Truly appreciate it.
Thank you, Ron. And
I
thank
will
you,
just
Webster.
close this.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I'll close this out and remind everyone today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Academy.
And it's an official podcast of NAILD, the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors. Check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. Got all of our episodes and a whole lot more. But huge shout out to our sponsor for this episode. We cannot do this without their support, the Dolly Alliance. Check out their North American Summit, which is co-located with ArcLight Summit, which Jason is going to be speaking on LP30 at. So you should check it out on September 15th. But the Dolly North American Summit is going to be on September 16th and 17th. So if you're going to go to ArcLight Summit, you may as well stick around and check out the Dolly Summit and learn a lot about Dolly. There's a lot to learn about it, and I highly encourage you to at least consider it because it's going to be a really cool show. Thank you so much for joining us. And Jason, thank you. This was an awesome conversation.